When a white Rolls-Royce pulled into Caleb Mercer's grease-stained garage on a scorching Thursday afternoon, he assumed someone was lost. Rich people didn't come to his side of San Diego, not unless their GPS had a cruel sense of humor. But then he saw her, a 19-year-old girl locked inside metal braces, her face tight with the kind of pain that doesn't ask for help anymore because help stopped coming years ago. Her mother, a woman who wore wealth like armor, was desperate. And Caleb, a widowed mechanic with calloused hands and a promise buried deep in his heart, was about to risk everything to give a stranger back her life. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're tuning in from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The sun beat down on the cracked asphalt of Mercer's Auto Repair like it had a personal vendetta against anything still standing in this forgotten corner of San Diego. Caleb Mercer stood in the open bay door, a blue shop rag in one hand and a wrench in the other, squinting at the heat waves rising off the parking lot. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when people are too busy surviving to make noise. He'd been working on Mrs. Chen's Civic since dawn, replacing a timing belt that should have been changed 2 years ago. She couldn't afford it then. She could barely afford it now. But Caleb had learned a long time ago that some bills you just didn't send. The garage itself was a monument to making do. Cracked concrete floors, fluorescent lights that flickered when they felt like it, walls covered in calendars from parts suppliers dating back to 2015. The waiting area consisted of 3 mismatched chairs, a coffee maker that only worked if you hit it just right, and a collection of outdated magazines his late wife had organized before she got sick. He kept meaning to throw them out. 5 years later, they were still there. Caleb was 38, though some days he felt 60. Tall and lean, with dark hair that was starting to show gray at the temples, and hands that bore the permanent stains of a man who'd spent his whole life fixing things. His daughter, Emma, told him he needed to smile more. Easy for a 14-year-old to say. She hadn't watched someone die slowly, hadn't made promises to people who couldn't hear them anymore. He was about to head back inside when he heard it, the low, powerful purr of an engine that didn't belong anywhere near this zip code. Caleb straightened, watching as a white Rolls-Royce Phantom glided down the street like a swan that had wandered into a junkyard. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. The car turned into his lot, moving with the kind of cautious precision that suggested the driver was terrified of scratching it. It came to a stop near the garage entrance, and for a moment nobody got out. Caleb could see 2 figures inside, silhouettes behind tinted windows. Then the back door opened. The woman who emerged was probably in her mid-40s, though she'd clearly spent a fortune making sure nobody could tell for certain. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than Caleb's truck, her dark hair pulled back in a style that was somehow both severe and elegant. Everything about her, from her posture to the way she glanced around the garage with barely concealed distaste, screamed money and power. But it was the second person who made Caleb forget about the heat, the grease on his hands, and the half-finished Civic behind him. The girl who stepped out, young woman really, maybe 19, moved like every inch of motion cost her something. Her legs were enclosed in elaborate braces, metal and composite materials running from her hips to her ankles, with joints at the knees that locked and released with small mechanical sounds. She gripped a cane in her right hand, her knuckles white with the effort. But it was her face that hit Caleb like a punch to the chest. She was trying so hard not to show the pain, lips pressed tight, eyes focused on the ground, breathing carefully controlled. He'd seen that expression before. His brother David had worn it every day for the last 3 years of his life. "Excuse me." The older woman's voice was crisp, professional, the kind of tone that was used to being obeyed. "Is there someone here who can help us? Our car has overheated." Caleb pulled himself back to the present. "That'd be me. Caleb Mercer." He walked toward them, noticing how the woman positioned herself slightly in front of the girl, protective. "Let me take a look." He popped the hood and steam hissed out. The smell of hot coolant filled the air. A hose had burst, probably stressed by the heat. A simple fix, 15 minutes tops. But Caleb found himself glancing past the engine at the girl, who had moved to lean against the side of the building, her face turned toward the shade. "Coolant hose," he said, straightening. "I can have it done in 20 minutes. You're welcome to wait inside where there's AC." He gestured toward the small office that doubled as a waiting room. Thank you. The woman's tone suggested she was used to people thanking her, not the other way around. I'm Renee Vale. This is my daughter Harper. The names meant nothing to Caleb, though the way Renee said them suggested they should. He nodded at Harper, who managed a small, exhausted smile. Nice to meet you both. Let me get you settled inside, then I'll handle the car. The waiting room was nothing like what they were used to. Caleb could tell that immediately. Renee's eyes swept over the worn chairs, the ancient magazines, the water cooler in the corner with visible mineral deposits. But she didn't complain. She simply helped Harper to the most stable-looking chair, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Harper lowered herself into the seat with agonizing slowness, every muscle in her body tense. When she finally settled, she let out a breath that was almost a gasp. Can I get you some water? Caleb asked. Fair warning, the cooler's older than my daughter, but the water's cold. Please, Harper said softly. Her voice was hoarse, like she didn't use it much. Caleb filled 2 paper cups and handed them over. Renee accepted hers with a nod. Harper took hers with both hands, and he noticed the slight tremor in her fingers. I'll be right outside if you need anything, he said, then headed back to the Rolls-Royce. He worked quickly, his hands moving through the familiar motions of loosening clamps, removing the burst hose, fitting the replacement. But his mind was elsewhere. The girl? Harper. Couldn't have been more than 19, 20 at most. And those braces weren't temporary. This was her life. Had been for a while based on the way she moved. Caleb knew more about mobility devices than most mechanics had any right to. His brother David had been paralyzed from the waist down after a motorcycle accident when Caleb was 22. For 8 years, Caleb had watched David struggle with wheelchairs, braces, experimental treatments that promised everything and delivered nothing. He'd learned to spot the signs of chronic pain, the way people compensated, the toll it took. Harper had all those signs and more. He was tightening this final clamp when he heard it, a sharp intake of breath, almost a whimper, quickly stifled. Caleb looked up. Through the office window, he could see Harper shifting in her chair, her face contorted. Renee was beside her immediately, one hand on her daughter's shoulder. Caleb set down his wrench and walked inside. Everything all right? Renee looked up, and for just a second her professional mask slipped. He saw exhaustion there, and fear, and something that might have been hope dying slowly. She's fine. Just needs a moment. Mom, I'm okay, Harper whispered, but her voice was strained. Caleb knew he should mind his own business. These were customers, strangers, people from a world so far removed from his that they might as well be from another planet. But he'd made a promise once, standing in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and defeat. He'd promised David that if he ever saw someone suffering the way David had suffered, he wouldn't look away. Mind if I ask what kind of braces those are? He kept his tone casual, the same voice he used when talking to customers about their cars. Renee's eyes narrowed slightly. They're custom orthotic devices, made by one of the best medical equipment manufacturers in the country. I'm sure they are, Caleb said, but they're hurting her. She has a spinal condition, Renee said, her voice taking on an edge. The braces are necessary for support. Her doctors— I'm not questioning her doctors, Caleb interrupted gently. But I spent 8 years watching my brother deal with braces, wheelchairs, every kind of mobility aid you can imagine. And I learned to tell the difference between necessary pain and pain that's being caused by the equipment itself. Harper looked up at him, and he saw something shift in her eyes. Interest, maybe even hope. What do you mean? Caleb pulled up one of the other chairs and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. When you're standing or walking, where does it hurt the most? My hips, Harper said immediately, and my lower back. But that's normal, the doctors said. It's compensation, Caleb said. Your body's trying to work around the braces instead of with them. May I? He gestured toward her legs. Renee started to object, but Harper nodded. Caleb moved closer, examining the braces without touching. They were impressive pieces of engineering, carbon fiber frames, titanium joints, precision manufacturing. Someone had spent a fortune on these. But the angles were wrong. The knee joints, he said, pointing. They're locked at slightly different angles. See how your left leg sits maybe 2 degrees more extended than your right. That means when you stand, your hips aren't level. Your left hip sits higher, so your spine has to curve to compensate. Every step you take, your lower back is twisting to keep you upright. Harper stared at him. I've seen 17 different specialists. Physical therapists, orthopedic surgeons, neurologists. Nobody ever... Her voice cracked. They all said the pain was part of my condition, that I just needed to manage it. How long have you been wearing these specific braces? Caleb asked. 3 years, Renee said quietly. They cost $800,000. Caleb let out a low whistle. Well, that's unfortunate, because they're wrong. The problem isn't your condition, it's that these are fighting your body instead of supporting it. Renee stood up abruptly. Mr. Mercer, I appreciate your concern, but my daughter has received care from some of the most renowned physicians in the world, people with decades of experience and multiple degrees, and I'm a mechanic with dirty hands and a high school diploma, Caleb said, standing to meet her eyes. I get it, but credentials don't mean much if the fundamentals are wrong. And the fundamental problem here is balance. Everything in motion, whether it's a car or a human body, needs to be balanced around its center of gravity. These braces are forcing Harper's center of gravity to shift with every step. That's why she's in pain. This is absurd, Renee said, but there was less conviction in her voice now. Let him look, Mom. Harper's voice was quiet but firm. Please, what's the worst that could happen? I'm already in pain every single day. At least he's offering an explanation that makes sense. Renee closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, Caleb saw something he hadn't expected. Desperation. This woman, who probably commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions before breakfast, was desperate. You have no credentials, she said slowly. No medical license, no engineering degree. If you're wrong, if you hurt her, then you'll sue me for everything I own, which wouldn't take long, Caleb said. I understand the risk you're taking, but I've got to ask, what risk is Harper taking if nothing changes? Harper let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. I'll be exactly where I am now, stuck, hurting, watching my life happen through a window. Renee's hand tightened on her daughter's shoulder. Harper, I want him to try, Harper said. I know you've spent millions. I know you've flown me all over the world to see specialists. I know you've done everything a mother could possibly do. But Mom, I'm 19 years old, and I can't remember what it feels like to stand without pain. If there's even a chance... Her voice broke, and Renee pulled her daughter close, both of them crying now. Caleb looked away, giving them privacy, feeling like an intruder on a moment too raw for strangers to witness. After a long moment, Renee straightened, wiping her eyes with the kind of precise movements that suggested she rarely allowed herself to cry. What would you need to do? First, just examine the braces more carefully, Caleb said. Take some measurements, see exactly what's going on. Then, if I'm right about the problem, I'd need to adjust the joint angles. It's delicate work, but it's not complicated. Not really. When? Harper asked. Caleb checked his watch. It was 2 in the afternoon. Emma wouldn't be home from school until 4. Now works if you've got time. Your car will be ready in 10 minutes anyway. Renee looked around the garage, the cracked floor, the ancient equipment, the general air of barely controlled chaos. This wasn't a state-of-the-art facility. This wasn't even a particularly clean facility. But her daughter was looking at Caleb Mercer like he'd just offered her the sun and the moon. All right, Renee said, but I want to be clear. If at any point I think you're causing harm, we stop immediately. Absolutely, Caleb agreed. I wouldn't have it any other way. He finished the car repair while Renee made phone calls, canceling appointments, rescheduling meetings, using the kind of clipped, efficient language that suggested she was used to her schedule bending to her will rather than the other way around. Harper sat quietly, watching Caleb work with an intensity that made him self-conscious. You can ask, he said finally, closing the hood of the Rolls-Royce. Whatever you're wondering. Your brother, Harper said softly. You said you took care of him for 8 years. What happened? Caleb was quiet for a moment, wiping his hands on his rag even though they were already clean. Pneumonia. His immune system was compromised from all the medications. He fought it for 2 weeks, but he shrugged, trying to make it look casual. That was 5 years ago. I'm sorry, Harper said, and she meant it. He could hear it in her voice. Yeah, me too. Caleb cleared his throat. But David made me promise something before he died. He said if I ever met someone who was dealing with what he dealt with, I shouldn't just walk by. That's the thing about suffering. Once you've seen it up close, you can't unsee it. You can't pretend it's not happening. Harper nodded slowly. Most people pretend pretty well. Most people haven't watched someone they love struggle every day just to exist, Caleb said. Changes your perspective. He set up a work area in the garage bay, clearing off a large table and positioning it near his best light. Renee helped Harper over, the two of them moving in the synchronized way of people who'd been dealing with this for years. Harper sat on the table's edge while Caleb pulled up a stool and a notebook. All right, he said. First things first. I need to understand the mechanics of what we're working with. Talk me through what happened. How did you end up in braces? Harper took a breath, and he could see her mentally stepping back through years of painful memories. I was 8. We were at the beach, just Mom and me this rare day where she wasn't working. There was a sandbar, and I swam out to it. But I didn't see the riptide. She paused. I went under. Mom dove in after me, but by the time she got me back to shore, I'd been without oxygen for almost 4 minutes. Brain damage. It affected my motor control, specifically my legs. The doctor said I'd never walk again. But you did, Caleb said, looking at the braces. With help. Intensive therapy, experimental treatments, these braces. I can walk technically, but it's... She closed her eyes. It's like my body is fighting itself every single second. And it hurts. It always hurts. Caleb made notes, sketching rough diagrams of the brace structure. The pain, is it constant or does it spike during certain movements? Both, Harper said. There's baseline pain, like a 4 out of 10, but when I walk, it shoots up to 7 or 8. Standing still is actually worse sometimes because all the pressure is just sitting on my hips and spine. And the braces themselves. When you put them on in the morning, do they feel tight, loose? Where's the contact points? Harper pointed to various places on the braces. The hip joints, the knee supports, the ankle cuffs. Caleb examined each one, running his fingers along the edges, checking how they sat against her body. He could see pressure points, places where the metal and composite had rubbed against skin for so long that there were permanent marks. Renee watched him work with the intensity of a hawk, ready to swoop in at the first sign of trouble. But Caleb moved carefully, explaining everything he was doing, asking permission before each touch. After 45 minutes of examination and note-taking, he sat back. Okay, I think I've got it. And? Renee asked. The braces are engineered beautifully, Caleb said. Whoever designed them knew their materials, knew the mechanics of load distribution, but they built them for a theoretical patient, not for Harper specifically. Look here. He pointed to the hip joints. These are set at angles that would be perfect for someone with completely symmetrical muscle development and bone structure. But Harper's right side is stronger than her left because that's how she's compensated for years. The braces don't account for that. They're forcing both sides to move identically, which means her body has to fight the stronger side to accommodate the weaker one. So what would you do differently? Harper asked, leaning forward despite the pain it caused. Caleb flipped to a new page in his notebook and started sketching. I'd adjust the joint angles to account for your natural compensation patterns. Instead of fighting them, we'd work with them. I'd also redistribute the contact points. Right now, too much pressure is concentrated at your hips and lower spine. We could spread that load more evenly along your legs, and... He hesitated. What? Renee demanded. The weight. These braces are heavy because they're built to be strong. But strength isn't always what you need. Sometimes you need flexibility. I think we could rebuild them with lighter materials in certain places, keep the structural integrity where it matters, but reduce the overall load Harper's carrying by maybe 20%. Harper's eyes were bright with something Caleb recognized as dangerous. Hope. He'd seen it before, in David's eyes every time a new treatment was suggested. Hope was a knife that cut both ways. How long would it take, she asked, to make the adjustments? I'd need to take the braces apart, which means you'd need another way to get around. I have a wheelchair, Harper said quickly. In the car. I hate it, but I have it. Caleb nodded. Good. Then I'd say a week, maybe 2. I'd need to source some materials, do the mechanical work, test everything multiple times. We can pay you, Renee said. Whatever you need, I don't want your money, Caleb interrupted. Not yet. Not until we know if this actually works. If it does, you can pay me fair rate for the labor and materials. If it doesn't, he shrugged, then it's on me. Renee stared at him like he had just spoken a foreign language. I don't understand. Why would you do this? Caleb thought about David, about promises made in hospital rooms, and the weight of watching someone suffer when you couldn't help. He thought about his own daughter, Emma, and how he'd move mountains for her if she needed him to. Because I can, he said simply. And because Harper asked, that's enough. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of the office phone ringing. Caleb excused himself to answer it, Mrs. Chen asking about her Civic. He told her it'd be ready tomorrow, no charge for the extra work. When he came back, Harper and Renee were talking in low voices, their heads close together. They looked up as he approached. We'd like to proceed, Renee said formally, like they were signing a business contract. But I need to know, what if this makes things worse? What if you adjust something and Harper ends up in more pain? It was a fair question, the kind that required an honest answer. That's possible, Caleb admitted. Working with the human body is different from working with cars. There are more variables, more things that can go wrong. I can't guarantee this will work. All I can tell you is that I'll be careful. I'll test everything thoroughly, and if something doesn't feel right, we'll stop and reassess. Harper reached for her mother's hand. It's worth the risk. You don't know that, Renee said, but there was no heat in it, just fear. Yes, I do. Because right now, this is my life. Harper gestured at the braces, at her own body. Pain and limitation and watching everyone else move through the world while I'm stuck. If there's a chance, even a small one, that things could be different, I have to take it. Renee closed her eyes again, and Caleb saw her gathering herself, pulling on that armor of control and certainty. When she opened her eyes, she was all business. What do you need from us? They spent the next hour working out logistics. Harper would need to be without the braces for at least a week, probably 2. Renee would clear her schedule to stay with her daughter in San Diego. They'd get a hotel nearby. Caleb would need detailed specifications from the brace manufacturer, which Renee promised to obtain regardless of what confidentiality agreements she had to breach. By the time they left, the sun was starting to dip toward the horizon, painting the garage in amber light. Caleb helped Harper to the car. She'd switched to her wheelchair, which she maneuvered with practiced efficiency despite obvious distaste. Thank you, she said, looking up at him from the chair, for seeing me, for believing you could help. Haven't helped yet, Caleb said. Let's see if I can actually pull this off before we start celebrating. You will, Harper said with absolute certainty. I don't know why, but I believe you will. After they drove away, Caleb stood in the empty garage, looking at the notes he'd taken, the sketches he'd made. What had he just gotten himself into? He was a mechanic, not a medical professional. If this went wrong, if he hurt that girl? But then he thought about the look in Harper's eyes, that desperate, dying hope. He thought about David, about all the times he'd wish someone would just try something different instead of sticking to protocols and procedures that clearly weren't working. He thought about promises made and kept. All right, David, he said to the empty air. I'm going to need your help on this one. His phone buzzed. Emma, texting that she was home and starting homework. Caleb smiled, locked up the garage, and headed home. Tomorrow, he'd start figuring out how to keep the promise he'd just made. Tonight, he'd have dinner with his daughter and try not to think about all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. Emma was waiting at the kitchen table when Caleb got home, her algebra textbook open, but clearly forgotten. At 14, she had her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin, and right now both were pointed directly at him with an expression he knew all too well. You're late, she said, not looking up from her phone. And you've got that look. What look? Caleb dropped his keys on the counter and headed for the fridge. The one you get when you're about to do something that's either really smart or really stupid, and you haven't figured out which yet. She finally glanced up. So what is it this time? Another project car you're going to restore and never finish? Caleb pulled out leftovers from last night's dinner and stuck them in the microwave. Not a car. A person. That got her attention. Emma set down her phone. What person? He told her about Harper and Renee, about the braces and the pain and the promise he'd made. Emma listened with the kind of intense focus she usually reserved for her favorite shows, occasionally asking questions that were sharper than most adults would think to ask. "So let me get this straight," she said when he finished. "You're going to take apart some super expensive medical equipment that was made by actual professionals, redesign it based on what you learned from Uncle David, and hope you don't accidentally make things worse for this girl." "That about sums it up, yeah." Emma was quiet for a moment. Uncle David would have liked that. He always said the worst part wasn't the chair or the pain. It was everyone treating him like he was made of glass, like he couldn't handle the truth. "I remember." Caleb pulled his dinner from the microwave and sat across from her. "He made me promise, before he died, that if I ever saw someone suffering the way he did, I wouldn't just walk away." "I know, Dad. You've told me." Emma's voice was gentle. "But you also need to be realistic. What if you can't help her? What if you make things worse?" It was the same question Renee had asked, and Caleb still didn't have a better answer. "Then I'll have to live with that. But Em, you didn't see her face. She's 19 years old, and she looks like she's already given up on everything that matters. If there's even a chance I can change that, then you have to try," Emma finished. "I get it. Just be careful, okay? You've got a tendency to care too much about other people and not enough about yourself." Caleb smiled. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just don't listen." She stood up and kissed the top of his head. "I'm going to finish my homework. Try not to stay up all night researching biomechanics or whatever." But that's exactly what Caleb did. After Emma went to bed, he pulled out his laptop and dove into everything he could find about mobility braces, spinal injuries, compensation patterns, and gait mechanics. He read medical journals he barely understood, watched videos of physical therapy sessions, and sketched design after design in his notebook. By 2 in the morning, his eyes were burning and his brain felt like mush, but he had the beginnings of a plan. The modifications he wanted to make weren't revolutionary. They were just logical applications of principles he already understood. Balance, distribution of force, working with the body's natural tendencies instead of against them. He finally fell asleep at his kitchen table, his head pillowed on his arms, dreaming of angles and joints, and a girl who'd forgotten what it felt like to move without pain. The next morning, Renee called at exactly 8 o'clock. Caleb was already at the garage, having woken at dawn with ideas he needed to work out on paper. "We're at the Bayfront Hotel," she said without preamble. "Room 412. When can you start?" "I need the manufacturer's specifications first," Caleb said. "And I want to take another look at the braces in better light, get some precise measurements. I'm having the specs sent to your email. They should arrive within the hour." There was a pause. "I may have threatened legal action to get them to cooperate." "I'm not going to ask." Caleb grabbed a notepad. "I can come by this afternoon, around 2? That work for you?" "We'll be here." The specifications arrived at 9:15, and Caleb spent the next 4 hours poring over them. The braces were even more sophisticated than he'd thought. Microprocessors in the joints that adjusted resistance based on movement patterns, sensors that tracked stress distribution, composite materials that were stronger than steel and lighter than aluminum. Someone had put serious engineering genius into these things. They just hadn't put in enough humanity. At 2 o'clock sharp, Caleb knocked on the door of room 412 at the Bayfront Hotel. Renee answered immediately, like she'd been waiting by the door. "Come in. Harper's resting, but she's awake." The hotel room was one of those suites that cost more per night than Caleb made in a week. Harper was on the couch by the window, her legs elevated on pillows, the wheelchair folded nearby. She looked tired, but she smiled when she saw him. "Hey," she said. "Ready to take me apart?" "Just the braces," Caleb said, setting down his tool bag. "You get to stay in one piece." He spent the next hour doing a detailed examination, measuring every joint angle, every contact point, every stress distribution pattern. He had Harper move through different positions, sitting, standing with support, taking a few careful steps, while he observed how the braces interacted with her body. Renee watched it all with hawk eyes, occasionally asking questions that revealed she'd spent the night doing her own research. She might not understand the mechanics the way Caleb did, but she was smart enough to know when something didn't make sense. "The left hip joint," she said at one point. Why is it set 2 degrees higher than the right? Because whoever designed these assumed Harper's hips were level, Caleb explained. But they're not. Her right hip sits slightly higher because of how her spine compensates for the muscle weakness on her left side. The braces are trying to force her into a position her body physically can't maintain. Harper winced as she shifted position. Is that why it always feels like I'm fighting myself when I walk? Exactly. Your body knows what it needs to do to stay balanced. The braces are telling it to do something different. That conflict is causing the pain. After the examination, Caleb laid out his plan. He'd need to disassemble the braces completely, which would take a full day. Then he'd adjust the joint angles, redistribute the contact points, and replace some of the heavier structural elements with lighter alternatives that would maintain strength while reducing weight. How long? Harper asked. 2 weeks if everything goes right. Maybe 3 if I run into problems. Caleb looked at Renee. And there will be problems. There always are when you're working with something this complex. What kind of problems? Renee's voice had that sharp edge again. Material issues, mostly. Some of what I want to do will require fabrication, custom parts that don't exist yet. I'll need to source materials, test them, make sure they can handle the stress loads. He paused. And there's always the chance I'll get everything put back together and realize I was wrong about the problem. Harper reached for her mother's hand. It's okay, Mom. I trust him. You trust too easily, Renee said, but there was no heat in it. She looked at Caleb. What do you need from us? Just patience. And Harper needs to be careful in the wheelchair. No risks, no pushing it. The last thing we need is an injury while we're doing this. They agreed that Caleb would take the braces with him that afternoon. Renee had already arranged for a car service to take Harper anywhere she needed to go, and the hotel was wheelchair accessible. Harper removed the braces with Caleb's help, a process that took 20 minutes and left her pale and shaking. God, I hate this part, she whispered as the last piece came off. Hate what? Caleb asked, carefully setting the brace components in the protective case he'd brought. Being helpless, being the girl in the chair who needs help with everything. Harper blinked hard against tears. I know I should be grateful I can walk at all. The doctors said I never would, but sometimes I just want to run, just once. I want to know what it feels like. Caleb looked at this girl who'd been dealt a terrible hand and had somehow not let it destroy her, and he felt the weight of what he'd promised settle even heavier on his shoulders. We'll get you there, he said. One way or another. The first 3 days were spent just understanding what he was working with. Caleb disassembled the braces piece by piece, documenting everything, taking measurements, testing the range of motion in each joint. He worked in the garage late into the night, after the regular customers had gone home, with only the fluorescent lights and the radio for company. Emma would stop by after school, doing her homework on the old couch in the office while her father worked. Sometimes she'd ask questions about what he was doing, and Caleb would explain the mechanics of it all, how force transferred through joints, how angles affected stability, how the human body was just another machine that needed proper maintenance. You talk about people like they're cars, Emma observed one evening. Cars are simpler, Caleb said, examining a hip joint under his work light. But the principles are the same, as everything needs to be balanced. Everything needs to work together. And when something's wrong, you have to find the root cause, not just treat the symptoms. On the 4th day, Harper and Renee came to the garage. Harper maneuvered her wheelchair through the door with the kind of aggressive competence that suggested she was still angry about needing it. I wanted to see where the magic was happening, she said, looking around the space with genuine interest. Not much magic, Caleb said. Mostly just trial and error and a lot of swearing. He showed her the braces, now completely disassembled and laid out on his largest work table. Harper stared at all the pieces, the joints, the frames, the sensors, the composite panels, like she was seeing them for the first time. I've worn these for 3 years, she said quietly. I never really thought about how they worked. They were just part of me. That's the problem, Caleb said. They shouldn't feel like a part of you. They should feel like a tool you're using, something that makes your life easier, not harder. He walked her through his planned modifications, using the actual components to illustrate what he wanted to change. Renee asked sharp questions about structural integrity and safety margins. Harper just listened, her eyes tracking every movement, every explanation. Can I try something? She asked suddenly. Depends what it is, Caleb said. Harper wheeled over to the table and picked up one of the knee joints, turning it over in her hands. When I walk, this is the part that locks up sometimes. It's supposed to release smoothly, but it catches. Why? Caleb took the joint from her and examined it. See the sensor here? It's measuring the angle of flexion and telling the microprocessor when to release the lock. But the threshold is set too high. Your natural walking gait doesn't quite reach that angle, so the joint thinks you're not ready to advance to the next step. So it's waiting for me to do something I physically can't do. Exactly. Harper laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Story of my life. Everyone waiting for me to do things I can't do, then wondering why I'm not trying hard enough. Renee's hand tightened on her daughter's shoulder. Caleb saw years of frustration and grief in that simple gesture. Well, we're going to change the thresholds, he said. Make the joints respond to what you can actually do, not what some algorithm thinks you should do. They stayed for another hour, Harper asking questions, and Caleb answering them with the kind of detailed honesty he'd have used with any colleague. He showed her the new materials he was planning to use: lighter composite panels, redesigned contact points with better padding, adjusted joints that would move in harmony with her body instead of against it. When they finally left, Emma emerged from the office where she'd been pretending to do homework. She's nice, Emma said. Scary smart, too. Did you hear some of those questions? She's been living with this for 11 years, Caleb said. Of course she's smart about it. You learn everything you can about the thing that's ruining your life. Is that what Uncle David did? Caleb nodded. He knew more about spinal injuries and mobility equipment than most of his doctors. Not because he wanted to, because he had to. When something controls your entire existence, you either learn everything about it or you go crazy. Emma was quiet for a moment. Do you think you can really help her? I don't know, Caleb admitted, but I'm going to try like hell. The first prototype was finished on day 7. Caleb had worked 16 hours straight to get it done, fueled by coffee and stubbornness and the memory of promises made. He called Harper at 8 in the morning, knowing it was too early, but unable to wait. I've got something, he said when she answered. It's not perfect, but I want you to try it. They came within the hour. Harper transferred from her wheelchair to Caleb's work chair, a tall stool with back support, while he carefully fitted the modified braces onto her legs. He'd lightened them by 18%, redistributed the contact points to spread pressure more evenly, and adjusted every joint angle to work with her natural compensation patterns instead of against them. How does it feel? He asked, securing the last strap. Different, Harper said. She shifted her weight, testing. Lighter. The pressure on my hips is less? That's the idea. Think you can stand? With Caleb on one side and Renee on the other, Harper eased off the stool and onto her feet. For a moment, she just stood there, breathing carefully. Well? Renee asked, her voice tight with controlled anxiety. It's better, Harper said slowly. The hip pain is definitely less, but she took a careful step, and Caleb saw her face change. Oh. What's wrong? Renee was already reaching for her. Nothing's wrong. It's just... Harper took another step, then another. The left knee. It's catching worse than before. Caleb swore under his breath. He'd adjusted the angle, but he'd overcorrected. The joint was now releasing too early, causing Harper's left leg to buckle slightly with each step. Okay, let's get you sitting, he said, guiding her back to the stool. I see what happened. I can fix it. How long? Harper asked, and he could hear the disappointment she was trying to hide. 2 days? Maybe 3? I need to recalibrate the sensor thresholds and adjust the joint resistance. He was already making notes, his mind racing through solutions. The good news is the hip relief is working exactly like I hoped, so we're on the right track. On the right track isn't walking, Harper said quietly. Caleb knelt down so he was at eye level with her. No, it's not. And I'm sorry. This is the part I warned you about, the problems, the setbacks, the trial and error. But we learned something important today. We know the hip modifications work. We just need to fine-tune the knees. Harper nodded, but he could see her pulling back, protecting herself from hope. He recognized that defense mechanism. David had used it constantly toward the end, when every new treatment had failed and the next one was just another way to be disappointed. After they left, Caleb went back to work with renewed intensity. The knee joint issue was mechanical. He'd made the spring resistance too light, causing the lock to release before Harper's leg was ready to support her weight. He needed something stronger, but still responsive enough to match her gait. He spent 2 days fabricating a new joint mechanism, testing it on a rig he built specifically for the purpose. Emma came home from school to find the garage transformed into something resembling a mad scientist's laboratory, with springs and sensors and calibration equipment scattered across every surface. "Dad, you need to sleep," she said, noting the coffee cups and the shadows under his eyes. "I will, soon. I'm close to something." "That's what you said yesterday, and the day before." She grabbed his shoulders and turned him to face her. "Harper needs you to succeed, which means she needs you to not collapse from exhaustion. Take a break, eat something, sleep for like 6 hours. The braces will still be here tomorrow." She was right, of course. Caleb forced himself to stop at midnight, went home, and slept for 5 hours before his brain woke him up with a new idea about sensor calibration. The second prototype was ready on day 10. This time, when Harper stood up, both knees locked and released smoothly. She took 1 step, then 2, then 5. The concentration on her face was absolute. "How's the pain?" Caleb asked. "It's there," Harper said, still walking. "But it's different, less sharp, more like pressure. Is that normal?" "Depends. Rate it for me, 1 to 10. Maybe a 5 compared to the usual 7 or 8. She stopped, breathing hard. "But I'm tired, like really tired. My legs feel like rubber." Caleb helped her sit. "That's because you're using different muscle groups. The braces are making your body work differently, so muscles that weren't being stressed before are suddenly getting a workout." "Is that good or bad?" Renee asked. "Good, mostly. It means Harper's body is adapting to the new support structure, but it also means we need to build up her strength gradually. Can't just jump into using these all day." Over the next few days, Harper came to the garage for short sessions. 20 minutes at first, then 30, then 45. Each time, Caleb made small adjustments based on her feedback. A slightly different angle here, a softer contact point there, a recalibrated sensor threshold. And each time, Harper walked a little longer, stood a little straighter, complained about the pain a little less. But there were setbacks. On day 13, one of the ankle joints cracked under stress, and Caleb had to completely rebuild it with stronger materials. On day 15, Harper developed a pressure sore on her right hip from a contact point that was positioned 2 millimeters too far forward. Each problem sent Caleb back to the drawing board, testing and adjusting and testing again. Emma watched her father work with a mixture of pride and concern. "You're going to fix this," she told him one night. "I know you are." "How do you know?" Caleb asked, not looking up from the joint he was recalibrating. "Because you promised, and you don't break promises. Not to Uncle David, and not to Harper." On day 16, everything came together. The modifications were complete, the calibrations were perfect, and when Harper stood up, she didn't wince. She took 1 step, then another, then started walking around the garage with increasing confidence. "How do you feel?" Caleb asked, watching her carefully for signs of pain or instability. "Good," Harper said, and then she stopped, her eyes widening. "Actually good. Not just better than before, but actually genuinely good. My hips don't hurt, my back doesn't hurt. I'm tired, but I'm not in pain." She looked at her mother, who had both hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, I'm not in pain," Harper whispered. Renee pulled her daughter into a fierce hug, and they both cried while Caleb politely turned away, pretending to check his notes. These moments weren't for him. He was just the mechanic who'd turned some wrenches and adjusted some angles. But when Harper pulled away from her mother and hugged him too, he let himself feel it, the weight of a promise kept, the relief of success against odds, the simple human satisfaction of fixing something that was broken. "Thank you," Harper whispered against his shoulder. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." "You're welcome," Caleb said, his voice rough. "But we're not done yet. This is just the beginning." Because what came next wasn't celebration. It was proof. Harper could walk around the garage without pain, But the garage was controlled territory. Flat floors, no obstacles, Caleb standing by ready to catch her if something went wrong. The real world was different. The real world had curbs and stairs and uneven pavement and people who didn't slow down or make room. "I want to try outside," Harper said the next morning, arriving at the garage with a determination Caleb hadn't seen before. Actual sidewalks, actual streets. Renee looked less certain. "Maybe we should wait. Make sure everything's stable first." "It's been stable for 3 days, Mom. I've walked around this garage probably 100 times. I need to know if this works in real life or if it only works here." Harper's jaw was set in a way that reminded Caleb of his own daughter when Emma had made up her mind about something. "She's right," Caleb said. "We need to test this in real conditions. But we start small, just around the block. I'll walk with her, and you can follow in the car in case we need a quick exit." They set out 20 minutes later, Harper moving slowly but steadily down the cracked sidewalk outside Mercer's auto repair. Caleb stayed close, but not too close, giving her space to find her own rhythm. Renee drove behind them at walking pace, hazard lights on, looking like she was escorting a presidential motorcade. The first obstacle was a section of sidewalk that had buckled from tree roots, creating an uneven surface that tilted at awkward angles. Harper approached it carefully, testing each step. "The left knee is compensating differently," she said, not stopping. "I can feel it adjusting to the slope." "Is it painful?" "No, just different, like my leg is actually working with me instead of against me." They made it around the block, 4 streets, maybe half a mile total, and Harper was exhausted but smiling. Not the polite smile she'd worn in the beginning, but something real and bright and full of wonder. "I did it," she said, half laughing, half crying. "I walked around the block without wanting to die." "You did more than that," Caleb said. "You adapted. Your body figured out how to work with the braces on uneven terrain. That's huge." Over the next week, they increased the difficulty. Longer walks, steeper inclines, a shopping mall with tile floors and crowds of people. Each expedition revealed small issues that Caleb would adjust back at the garage. A sensor that was too sensitive to sudden movements, a contact point that rubbed during extended walking, a joint that needed different resistance for uphill versus downhill. But the pain never came back, not the sharp, constant agony that Harper had lived with for 3 years. She got tired, her muscles got sore from the unaccustomed exercise, but it was the normal exhaustion of physical activity, not the grinding torment of a body fighting itself. Emma started joining them on the walks, chatting with Harper about school and music and the particular frustrations of being a teenage girl. Caleb would walk slightly ahead, giving them privacy, but he'd catch fragments of conversation that made him smile. "So, your dad just decided to help you?" Emma was asking. "Just like that?" "Just like that," Harper said. "I think I reminded him of your uncle." "You did. He gets this look sometimes when he talks about Uncle David, like he's still trying to save him." Emma was quiet for a moment. "But you're not Uncle David. You're getting better. Thanks to your dad." "Thanks to both of you," Emma corrected. "He couldn't have done this if you weren't willing to trust him. That takes guts." On the 15th day after the modifications were complete, Harper walked into the garage without her cane. She'd been using it less and less, but this was the first time she'd arrived without it at all. "Look at you," Caleb said, grinning. "Getting cocky." "Getting confident," Harper corrected. "There's a difference." She demonstrated by walking the length of the garage and back, her gait smooth and balanced. "I want to try something." "What kind of something?" Harper took a breath. "I want to try running." The silence that followed was heavy. Renee, who'd been checking her phone, looked up sharply. "Absolutely not." "Mom, Harper, you haven't run since you were 8 years old. You don't know if your body can handle it, if the braces can handle it, which is exactly why I want to try it here, with Caleb supervising, instead of by myself where something could actually go wrong." Harper's voice was steady, reasonable. "I've been walking for 2 weeks without pain. My muscles are getting stronger. The braces are stable. I want to know what I'm capable of." Caleb understood the impulse. After years of limitation, the possibility of freedom was intoxicating. But he also understood the risk. Running put exponentially more stress on joints and supports than walking. If something failed at speed, Harper could be seriously hurt. "Let's compromise," he said. "Not running, not yet. But we could try jogging. Very light, very slow, just to see how the braces respond to increased impact." Renee looked like she wanted to argue, but Harper was already nodding. "Okay, yes, let's try that." They cleared a path through the garage, moving equipment and cars to create a straight runway about 30 yards long. Caleb set up a camera to record the test. If something went wrong, he wanted footage to analyze. Then he walked Harper through a series of stretches, warming up muscles that hadn't been asked to run in over a decade. "Start slow," he instructed. "Not even a jog yet, just a fast walk. I want to see how the braces handle the increased pace before we add impact." Harper started walking, then gradually increased her speed. The braces moved smoothly, joints adjusting to the faster rhythm. Her breathing got heavier, but her form stayed stable. "How does it feel?" Caleb called. "Good. Really good." Harper's face was flushed with exertion and excitement. "Can I go faster?" "Little bit. Don't push it." Harper increased her pace to something between a walk and a jog, her feet barely leaving the ground. And then, whether by intention or instinct, she pushed off harder and her stride opened up, and for 3 steps, just 3, she was actually running. The 4th step, her left knee buckled slightly. Not enough to make her fall, but enough to scare everyone watching. Harper immediately slowed to a walk, breathing hard. "I'm okay," she said quickly, seeing the panic on her mother's face. "I'm okay. The knee just—" It felt like the lock released a fraction too early. Caleb was already reviewing the camera footage on his phone, watching the moment in slow motion. Harper was right. The sensor had released the lock about 50 milliseconds too soon, causing a momentary instability. At walking speed, it wouldn't have mattered. At running speed, it had nearly caused a fall. "No more running," Renee said flatly. This was a mistake. "It wasn't a mistake," Caleb said, still studying the footage. "It was information. Now we know the sensors need recalibration for higher impact activities. I can fix this." "You can't fix everything!" Renee's voice cracked, years of fear and frustration breaking through her controlled exterior. "You're a mechanic, not a miracle worker. My daughter could have been seriously hurt just now." "But she wasn't," Harper said quietly. "And now we know what needs to be adjusted." "Isn't that how this works? Test, learn, improve?" "That's how it works when you're building a car," Renee shot back. "Not when you're experimenting on my daughter's body." The words hung in the air like smoke. Caleb felt them land, felt the accusation behind them. She wasn't wrong. He was experimenting, using trial and error on a human being who trusted him. The fact that it had worked so far didn't mean it would keep working. The fact that Harper wasn't in pain anymore didn't mean she was safe. "Maybe we should stop here," he said quietly. "The braces work for walking. That's more than you had 2 weeks ago. Pushing for more. Pushing for running. Maybe that's too much risk for too little gain." Harper's head snapped up. "No, don't you dare give up on me now." "I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic about—" "Realistic?" Harper's voice rose, anger replacing the usual careful control. "You want to talk about realistic? Realistically, I should be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. Realistically, I should never have walked again after what happened to me. Realistically, every doctor my mother's millions could buy told me to accept my limitations and be grateful for what I had." She was crying now, furious tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. "You're the first person who looked at me and saw possibility instead of limitation. You're the first person who thought maybe, just maybe, I deserved more than just good enough. And now you want to stop because one sensor needs recalibration?" "Harper," Renee started, but her daughter wasn't finished. "I've spent 11 years being careful, being realistic, being grateful for scraps. And I'm done. I'm so completely done with settling for less than what I'm capable of." Harper turned to Caleb. "You told me the braces should be a tool, not a prison. Well, right now they're a tool that lets me walk. I want them to be a tool that lets me run. I want them to be a tool that lets me live without constantly wondering what I'm missing." The garage was silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and Harper's ragged breathing. Caleb looked at this girl who'd been through more in her 19 years than most people experienced in a lifetime, who'd been knocked down by fate and expensive medical equipment and her own body, and who was still fighting for more. He thought about David, who'd fought until the very end, not for a cure, but simply for dignity, for the chance to live on his own terms instead of the terms his injury dictated. He thought about Emma, who'd learned from watching her uncle die that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was refuse to accept the limits other people set for you. All right, Caleb said, we keep going, but we're smart about it. I recalibrate the sensors, we test everything thoroughly, and we don't try running again until I'm absolutely certain the braces can handle it. Harper nodded, wiping her eyes. Thank you. Renee looked like she wanted to argue, but she just closed her eyes and took a long breath. I can't lose you, she said finally. You're all I have. If something happens because we push too hard, nothing's going to happen, Mom. Caleb won't let it. Harper's certainty was absolute, the kind of faith that was both humbling and terrifying. The sensor recalibration took 3 days. Caleb didn't just adjust the existing thresholds. He completely rewrote the response protocols, creating different modes for different activities. Walking mode, where the sensors prioritize smooth transitions and energy efficiency. Athletic mode, where they prioritize stability and impact absorption. Emergency mode, where they locked immediately if they detected a fall pattern. He tested each mode exhaustively on his rig, running thousands of simulated cycles, stress testing the joints under conditions that mimicked running, jumping, even falling. Emma would come home from school to find the garage filled with the rhythmic clicking of joints, engaging and releasing, her father hunched over his laptop, adjusting code and watching data streams. You know you're kind of obsessed, right? She said one evening. I prefer dedicated, Caleb replied, not looking away from his screen. Dad, when was the last time you ate something that wasn't delivered in a cardboard box? He had to think about it. Tuesday? It's Friday. Come on, I'm making actual food. Emma physically pulled him away from his workstation. Harper needs you functional, not collapsed from malnutrition. Over dinner, pasta that Emma had learned to make from YouTube videos, she asked the question Caleb had been avoiding. What happens after this? After Harper can run? What do you mean? I mean, you've basically invented a better mobility brace. What happens when other people find out? When other families like Harper's want your help? Caleb hadn't thought that far ahead. He'd been so focused on keeping his promise, on helping one person, that he hadn't considered the implications. I don't know. I'm not set up for that. I'm a mechanic, not a medical device manufacturer. Maybe you should be both, Emma said. Uncle David would have loved something like what you made for Harper. How many other people are out there right now dealing with the same pain, the same limitations, because nobody's thought to question whether their equipment is actually helping them? It was a good question, a dangerous question, because once Caleb started thinking about it, he couldn't stop. On day 18, Harper came back to try the recalibrated braces. Caleb had her walk first, testing the normal mode, then gradually transitioned to the athletic setting. The difference was subtle but significant. The joints responded faster, locked more firmly, provided better stability during the impact phase of each step. How does it feel? Caleb asked. Powerful, Harper said, a slow smile spreading across her face. Like the braces are actually supporting me instead of just tolerating me. They spent an hour having her walk at various speeds, testing the transitions between modes, making sure everything felt natural. Then, when Caleb was satisfied, he set up the runway again. Same as before, he instructed. Start slow, work up gradually. But this time, if you feel anything wrong, any instability, any pain, anything, you stop immediately. Promise me. I promise. Harper started walking, then transitioned to a fast walk, then a gentle jog. The braces moved perfectly, absorbing impact, maintaining stability. Her breathing was controlled, her form steady. And then she pushed off harder, and she was running, really running, her feet pounding against the concrete floor of the garage. 10 yards, 20, 30. She reached the end of the runway, turned, and ran back. When she finally stopped, her face was radiant with joy and tears and disbelief. I did it, she gasped. I ran. I actually ran. Renee was crying openly now, all her careful control abandoned. She pulled Harper into a hug, both of them laughing and sobbing. Caleb stood back, checking the camera footage one more time to make sure the braces had performed correctly, that there were no warning signs he'd missed. Everything looked good. Better than good. Perfect. Emma, who'd come to watch, sidled up next to him. "You did it, Dad." "We'll see. This was just one test. We need to make sure it's repeatable, that the braces hold up over time." "Dad, you did it. Let yourself feel good about it for like 5 seconds." So Caleb did. He watched Harper and Renee celebrate, watched this girl who'd been told she'd never walk again now jumping up and down with excitement, and he let himself feel the satisfaction of a job well done. But that satisfaction lasted exactly 2 days. The letter arrived at the garage on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier. Heavy paper, expensive letterhead, the kind of official document that always meant trouble. Caleb opened it, standing in the parking lot, squinting against the morning sun. It was from Brandt Medical Technologies, the company that had manufactured Harper's original braces. They were aware that he had modified their proprietary medical device without authorization. They were aware that he had no medical credentials or engineering certifications. They were aware that he was operating outside the bounds of FDA regulations regarding medical device modification. They wanted him to cease all activities related to the braces immediately. They wanted the modified devices returned to them for inspection. And they were considering legal action for intellectual property theft, unauthorized medical practice, and reckless endangerment. Caleb read the letter 3 times, his stomach sinking further with each pass. He'd been so focused on helping Harper that he hadn't thought about the legal implications. He'd modified a medical device worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. He'd effectively practiced medicine without a license, and now a major corporation with unlimited legal resources wanted to shut him down. He called Renee. She answered on the first ring. "We got one too," she said before he could speak. "They're threatening to sue me for allowing unauthorized modification of medical equipment. They're threatening to report Harper's case to the medical board as an example of what happens when people circumvent proper channels." "I'm sorry," Caleb said. "I should have thought about this. Should have known there would be consequences." "Don't apologize. You gave my daughter her life back. I'll deal with Brandt Medical." Her voice took on that steel edge Caleb had heard the first day they met. "They're not going to intimidate us into silence." But it wasn't just Brandt Medical. Over the next week, Caleb received letters from medical societies, disability advocacy groups, even the state medical board. Some were concerned about patient safety. Some were worried about precedent. Some were just angry that an outsider had succeeded where certified professionals had failed. The pressure was intense and constant. Caleb's phone rang at all hours. Reporters wanting interviews, lawyers offering representation, disability rights activists who thought he was either a hero or a menace depending on their perspective. He stopped answering calls from numbers he didn't recognize. Emma watched her father stress himself into exhaustion and finally put her foot down. "You need to talk to someone. Someone who knows about this stuff." "Like who? A lawyer?" "Like Harper. She's the one who's actually affected by all this. What does she want to do?" Caleb realized he'd been so busy defending himself that he hadn't asked the one person whose opinion actually mattered. He called Harper that evening. "I was wondering when you'd reach out," she said. "Mom told me about the letters, about Brandt trying to shut you down." "I'm sorry. This is my fault. I should have been more careful, should have gone through proper channels." Caleb, stop. "There are no proper channels for what you did. That's the whole problem." Harper's voice was firm. "The system is designed to protect companies like Brandt, not patients like me. They spent 3 years selling me braces that caused me pain, and nobody questioned it because they had the right certifications and the right credentials. You fixed me in 3 weeks because you actually listened. That doesn't change the fact that I broke rules, important rules probably." "Rules that needed breaking," Harper said. "Look, I've been thinking about this, about what happens next, and I want to fight." "Fight how?" "Go public, tell my story, show the world what you did and why it mattered. Brandt wants to shut us down quietly. Make this go away before anyone asks uncomfortable questions about why their expensive equipment was causing harm. I say we make it loud. We make it so loud they can't ignore it." Caleb's first instinct was to refuse. He didn't want attention. He didn't want to be a crusader or a symbol. He just wanted to help one person keep a promise to his dead brother. But then he thought about Emma's question. How many other people were out there, suffering because nobody questioned the system? If we do this, he said slowly, there's no going back. Brant will come at us with everything they have. Other companies will too. We could lose badly. I've already lost, Harper said. I lost 11 years of my life to pain and limitation. The worst thing they can do to me now is try to take away what you gave back, and I won't let that happen without a fight. The decision was made. They would go public, tell Harper's story, and let the world decide whether what Caleb had done was reckless endangerment or necessary innovation. But first, they needed proof. Real scientific proof that the modifications worked, and for that they needed someone with credentials that couldn't be dismissed. That's when Renee suggested Dr. Vanessa Hart. Dr. Vanessa Hart was the professor of biomedical engineering at Stanford, a woman whose research on adaptive prosthetics had earned her international recognition and a reputation for challenging conventional thinking. She was also, according to Renee's research, someone who'd been publicly critical of medical device manufacturers prioritizing profit over patient outcomes. She's our best shot, Renee said, showing Caleb articles Dr. Hart had written about innovation barriers in the medical device industry. If anyone will understand what you did and why it matters, it's her. And if she thinks I'm a reckless idiot who got lucky, Caleb asked, then we're no worse off than we are now. Renee's jaw was set. But I don't think she will. I think she'll see what I see. Someone who solved a problem everyone else ignored because they were too invested in the existing system. Renee made the call that afternoon. Caleb listened to one side of the conversation, trying to gauge Dr. Hart's reaction from Renee's carefully neutral responses. When Renee finally hung up, she was smiling. She'll see us. Tomorrow, at her lab. She wants to examine Harper and review your modifications. Renee paused. She also said she's been waiting for someone to challenge Brant for years. Apparently, they've been blocking innovation in mobility devices to protect their market share. The drive to Stanford the next morning felt surreal. Caleb followed Renee's car north on the 101, Emma riding shotgun because she'd refused to miss this. Harper sat in the back seat of her mother's Mercedes, nervous energy radiating off her in waves. Dr. Vanessa Hart met them in her lab, a sprawling space filled with equipment Caleb couldn't begin to identify. She was in her early 50s, black, with natural hair pulled back in a bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She shook Caleb's hand with a grip that suggested she didn't suffer fools. Mr. Mercer, I've read the documentation Ms. Vale sent over. Impressive work for someone without formal engineering training. Her tone was neutral, giving nothing away. Thank you, I think, Caleb said. It wasn't entirely a compliment. Your methods were unorthodox, your safety protocols were practically non-existent, and you took risks that could have resulted in serious injury. Dr. Hart turned to Harper. But you're walking without pain for the first time in years, so clearly something went very right. I want to understand what. She spent the next 3 hours putting Harper through a battery of tests. Gait analysis on a specialized treadmill equipped with sensors that measured everything from joint angles to pressure distribution. Range of motion assessments. Strength evaluations. She examined the modified braces with the kind of meticulous attention Caleb recognized from his own work, taking measurements, testing joints, reviewing every modification he'd made. Emma and Caleb sat on stools near the back of the lab, watching in silence. At one point, Emma leaned over and whispered, "She's either going to call you a genius or report you to every regulatory agency in California." "Could be both," Caleb muttered. Finally, Dr. Hart had Harper rest while she reviewed the data on her computer. The silence stretched out, broken only by the hum of equipment and the clicking of keys. Renee stood behind Dr. Hart's shoulder, trying to read the screens, her anxiety barely controlled. "Well," Dr. Hart said finally, turning to face them, "this is extraordinary." The word hung in the air. Caleb wasn't sure if extraordinary was good or bad in this context. "The modifications you made," Dr. Hart continued, looking at Caleb, "demonstrate an intuitive understanding of biomechanics that most of my graduate students would struggle to achieve. You identified the core problem, that the original braces were designed for a theoretical patient rather than Harper specifically, and you solved it using first principles engineering. No unnecessary complexity, no overthinking, just elegant problem solving." So you're saying he was right? Renee asked. I'm saying he was brilliant. Dr. Hart pulled up a comparison on her screen, Harper's gait before and after the modifications. Look at this. The original braces forced Harper's body into an unnatural alignment, causing chronic stress on her hips and spine. Mr. Mercer's modifications work with her body's natural compensation patterns. The result is a 63% reduction in joint stress and a 47% improvement in energy efficiency. These aren't marginal gains, this is transformative. Harper's hand found her mother's. Both women were crying again, but this time it was relief rather than fear. But, Doctor, Hart added, and Caleb's heart sank at that word. From a regulatory standpoint, what you did was completely illegal. You modified a Class II medical device without authorization. You practiced medicine without a license. You conducted human trials without oversight or approval. Any one of those violations could result in serious legal consequences. I know, Caleb said quietly. I knew it was risky, but Harper was in pain and I thought I could help. And you did help. That's the problem Brant Medical is facing right now. They can't argue that your modifications were harmful because Harper is demonstrably better. So instead they're arguing that you broke rules, which you did, and that breaking rules is dangerous, which it can be. Dr. Hart stood up, pacing. The medical device industry has legitimate reasons for regulation. We don't want random people making modifications to equipment that keeps people alive. But the system has become so rigid that it stifles innovation and protects corporate interests over patient welfare. So what do we do? Emma asked. She'd been quiet until now, but her voice was steady. Just let them shut my dad down? Let them take away Harper's braces and put her back in the ones that hurt her? Dr. Hart smiled, and it wasn't a friendly expression, it was the smile of someone about to pick a fight. We don't let them do anything. We go on the offensive. We document everything, publish the results, and force a conversation about patient-centered innovation versus corporate-controlled healthcare. You'd be willing to help us? Renee asked carefully. Publicly? Even knowing it could damage your reputation? Ms. Vale, I've spent 20 years researching how to make better mobility devices. I've published dozens of papers. I've trained hundreds of students. And in all that time, I've watched companies like Brant block innovations that could help people because those innovations threatened their profit margins. Dr. Hart's voice was hard now. Your mechanic solved in 3 weeks what the medical establishment has been failing to solve for decades. If I don't stand up for that, what's the point of any of my work? The plan came together over the next few hours. Dr. Hart would conduct a full analysis of Harper's case, documenting the problems with the original braces and the improvements from Caleb's modifications. She'd present the findings in a paper submitted to a major medical journal, with Harper and Caleb listed as co-authors, and she'd testify on their behalf if Brant Medical followed through on their legal threats. It won't be easy, Dr. Hart warned. Brant has lawyers, money, and influence. They'll attack your credentials, question your motives, try to paint you as a dangerous amateur playing with people's lives. Let them try, Harper said. Her voice was quiet but absolutely certain. I'll tell anyone who'll listen what those braces did to me and what Caleb's modifications gave me back. They left Stanford as the sun was setting, the bay stretching out golden and endless to their left. Emma fell asleep in the passenger seat, exhausted from the emotional intensity of the day. Caleb drove in silence, processing everything that had happened. His phone buzzed with a text from Renee. Thank you for everything, for not giving up. He didn't know how to respond to that, so he just sent back a thumbs-up emoji and focused on the road. The media attention started 3 days later when Dr. Hart released a preliminary statement to the press about her findings. The story was irresistible. Billionaire's daughter healed by humble mechanic, medical establishment threatened by outsider innovation, David versus Goliath with mobility braces instead of slingshots. Caleb's phone exploded with interview requests. Local news, national news, medical journals, disability advocacy groups, everyone wanted a piece of the story. He turned them all down at first, uncomfortable with the attention, but Renee convinced him that silence would let Brant control the narrative. We need to tell your side, she insisted. Show people who you are and why you did this. So Caleb agreed to one interview with a local San Diego station that had covered community stories in his neighborhood for years. The reporter, Maria Gonzalez, met him at the garage on a Wednesday afternoon. her cameraman setting up shots of the workspace where the miracle had happened. "Tell me why you did this," Maria said once they were rolling. "You're not a doctor. You're not an engineer. Why take the risk?" Caleb thought about all the polished answers he could give, all the ways he could make himself sound noble or heroic. But he'd never been good at pretense. "My brother was paralyzed," he said simply. "I watched him suffer for 8 years with equipment that was supposed to help, but mostly just reminded him of everything he'd lost. When I saw Harper dealing with the same thing, I couldn't walk away. I made a promise to my brother before he died that I'd help if I ever could. This was my chance to keep that promise." The interview aired that evening. By morning, it had been picked up by national outlets. Caleb woke to find his garage surrounded by news vans and reporters shouting questions. He called Emma to warn her there might be media at her school, then texted Renee for advice on how to handle the circus his life had become. Her response was immediate. "Don't talk to anyone else. We're scheduling a press conference for tomorrow. Harper wants to speak." The press conference was held at a hotel in downtown San Diego, a room that could hold maybe 200 people but felt packed with 300 crammed inside. Renee had arranged everything: the podium, the microphones, the backdrop with a simple message: patient care over corporate profit. Harper sat at the table in her modified braces, Caleb on one side and Dr. Hart on the other. Renee stood slightly behind, one hand on her daughter's shoulder. The room was hot with bodies and camera lights, the air thick with anticipation. Harper's prepared statement was simple and devastating. She described 11 years of pain, of doctors who told her it was normal, of expensive equipment that made her feel like a prisoner in her own body. She described meeting Caleb, his careful questions, his refusal to accept that suffering was inevitable. And she described the moment she walked without pain for the first time, the moment she ran, the pure joy of discovering her body could work with her instead of against her. "Brant Medical is threatening legal action," Harper said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "They say Mr. Mercer broke rules. They say he's not qualified. They say what he did was dangerous." She paused. "But I'm sitting here in braces that don't hurt me. I'm sitting here able to walk and run and live my life. And Brant wants to call that dangerous? They want to take this away from me because Caleb doesn't have the right pieces of paper on his wall?" The room erupted in questions. Harper fielded them with impressive composure, never defensive, always focusing on the facts of her experience. Dr. Hart provided the scientific credibility, explaining the biomechanics, the improvements, the potential for this approach to help others. Caleb said as little as possible, uncomfortable with being called a hero or an innovator. He was just a mechanic who'd kept a promise. But the public reaction was overwhelmingly supportive. Social media lit up with Harper's story. Disability rights advocates praised her courage. Other patients started coming forward with their own stories of medical equipment that caused more harm than good. The narrative Brant had hoped to control was slipping away from them. Then came the backlash. Medical societies issued statements about the dangers of unlicensed practice. Brant released their own press conference, featuring doctors who warned about the risks of modifications made without proper testing or oversight. They trotted out worst-case scenarios: equipment failures, injuries, deaths, all the terrible things that could happen when amateurs played doctor. "He got lucky," one orthopedic surgeon said on a morning talk show. "This time it worked out. But for every success story like Harper Vale, there could be 10 disasters we never hear about. The regulations exist for a reason." The uncertainty was exhausting. Caleb found himself second-guessing everything, lying awake at night wondering if the surgeon was right. What if he had just gotten lucky? What if the next person he tried to help got hurt? What if his modifications failed and Harper ended up worse than before? Emma found him in the garage at 2 a.m, staring at Harper's braces like they held answers to questions he hadn't figured out how to ask yet. "Can't sleep?" she said, pulling up a stool beside him. "Wondering if I made a mistake. Not in helping Harper, in going public with it. Maybe I should have just fixed her braces and left it at that. And let Brant keep selling equipment that hurts people? Let other families suffer because nobody wants to challenge the system?" Emma shook her head. "Dad, I know this is scary, but you did something important. You proved that the system isn't always right, that sometimes the people with the credentials are wrong, and the people with the heart are right." "Your mother would have hated this," Caleb said. "She always said I took too many risks, cared too much about other people's problems." Mom also said you had the biggest heart of anyone she'd ever met. Emma's voice was gentle. She knew you couldn't see someone suffering and just walk by. That's why she loved you. Caleb pulled his daughter close, grateful for her wisdom and her faith in him. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You've just been too busy saving people to notice. The federal hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later in Washington, D.C., a preliminary review to determine if Caleb's actions warranted prosecution. Renee hired lawyers, expensive ones, who specialized in medical device litigation. They prepped Caleb on what to say, how to present himself, how to appear competent but not arrogant, knowledgeable but not presumptuous. Just be yourself, one lawyer advised. You're a sympathetic figure, the working-class hero who helped someone in need. Don't try to be something you're not. The night before they flew to D.C., Caleb sat in his garage one last time, looking at the space where everything had started. The old chairs, the coffee maker, the scattered tools and equipment. This was who he was, a mechanic in a rundown garage, trying to fix things that were broken. He thought about David, about the promise made in a hospital room 5 years ago. He thought about Harper, about the trust she'd placed in him when she had every reason to be skeptical. He thought about Emma, watching her father take a stand for what he believed in despite the risks. Whatever happened tomorrow, he'd kept his promises. That had to count for something. The hearing room was smaller than Caleb expected, formal and cold with wood paneling and the seal of some federal agency he didn't recognize on the wall. A panel of 5 people sat at a raised table, doctors, lawyers, bureaucrats, all of them looking at Caleb like he was a particularly interesting specimen under a microscope. The Brandt medical lawyers went first, laying out their case with precision and barely concealed contempt. Caleb had violated federal regulations. He had no credentials. He had conducted medical procedures without oversight. He represented a dangerous precedent that could undermine public safety and trust in the medical device industry. If we allow mechanics to modify medical equipment based on intuition, the lead lawyer argued, we open the door to chaos. Today it's Mr. Mercer making braces. Tomorrow it's someone performing surgery in their garage. Where does it end? Then it was Dr. Hart's turn. She presented her analysis with the kind of clinical precision that came from decades of academic rigor. She showed the data, explained the improvements, demonstrated exactly why Caleb's modifications worked, and why the original braces had failed. The question before you, she said to the panel, is not whether Mr. Mercer broke rules. He did. The question is whether those rules are serving patients or protecting corporate interests. Because the evidence suggests that Brandt Medical knew their braces were causing problems and did nothing because fixing the problems would have cost them money and market share. That got a reaction. The Brandt lawyers objected, demanding proof. Dr. Hart calmly presented internal emails she'd obtained through her research connections, communications between Brandt engineers discussing the exact issues Caleb had identified and deciding that redesigning the braces wasn't cost-effective. The room went very quiet. Finally, it was Harper's turn to speak. She wheeled to the microphone. She'd chosen to use her chair for the hearing, wanting the panel to see what her life had been like before, and told her story one more time. But this time, she added something new. I want to show you something, she said. And then, with Renee's help, she stood up, removed the wheelchair, and walked across the hearing room. Not carefully, not tentatively, but with confidence and strength. She walked to the panel's table, turned, and walked back. This is what Caleb Mercer gave me, she said, her voice breaking. This is what your regulations almost prevented. I'm not asking you to throw out all the rules. I'm asking you to remember that the rules exist to help people, not to protect companies. And when the rules stop helping and start hurting, maybe it's time to change the rules. The panel deliberated for 2 hours. Caleb sat in the hallway with Renee, Emma, Harper, and Dr. Hart. Nobody speaking, everyone lost in their own thoughts about what would happen if the decision went against them. When they were called back in, the chairwoman of the panel spoke. We've reached a determination. Mr. Mercer, you violated several federal regulations regarding medical device modification. Under normal circumstances, this would result in fines and possibly criminal charges. Caleb's heart sank. This was it. The end. However, the chairwoman continued, We also find that your modifications demonstrably improved patient outcomes and that the original medical device was causing harm that the manufacturer failed to address, despite being aware of the problem. Furthermore, Dr. Hart's testimony suggests that current regulations may be inhibiting patient-centered innovation. She looked directly at Caleb. We're issuing a special provisional license that will allow you to continue working on mobility devices under Dr. Hart's supervision. You'll need to complete certification courses in biomedical engineering and safety protocols. You'll be subject to regular inspections and audits, and any future modifications must be documented and reviewed by a qualified medical professional before implementation. But we're not going to punish you for helping someone when the system failed them. The room erupted. Renee grabbed Caleb's hand. Harper was crying. Emma was grinning like she'd just won the lottery. Even the lawyers looked surprised. It wasn't everything. It wasn't complete vindication. But it was enough. It was a door opening, a possibility, a chance to keep helping people without destroying his life in the process. Outside the hearing room, reporters swarmed them with questions. This time, Caleb didn't hide. He stood beside Harper and answered honestly, talking about his brother, about promises kept, about the importance of listening to patients instead of just following protocols. That night, back in their hotel, Renee ordered room service for everyone, a celebration that felt both earned and fragile. They ate and talked and laughed, the tension of the past weeks finally releasing. "What happens now?" Harper asked. "You're officially going to do this? Help other people?" Caleb looked at Dr. Hart, who nodded encouragingly. "I guess so. If people want my help and Dr. Hart thinks I won't kill anyone, we'll see what we can do." "We'll do more than see," Dr. Hart said. "We're going to change how this industry thinks about patient care, starting with you getting those certifications so this provisional license becomes permanent." Emma raised her soda can in a toast. "To Caleb Mercer, the world's most overqualified mechanic." They all drank to that, even as Caleb wondered what he'd gotten himself into and whether he was ready for what came next. But ready or not, what came next arrived fast and relentless. The hearing had made national news, and within days, Caleb's phone was flooded with messages from families desperate for help. Parents whose children struggled with braces that didn't fit right. Veterans whose prosthetics caused chronic pain. People who'd been told to accept their limitations because that's just how the equipment worked. Caleb read every message, his heart breaking a little more with each one. A mother in Ohio whose 7-year-old daughter cried every morning when putting on her leg braces. A former Marine in Texas who'd given up on his prosthetic arm because it caused more problems than it solved. A teenager in Oregon who'd stopped going to school because her wheelchair was so uncomfortable she couldn't sit through a full day of classes. "I can't help all these people," he told Dr. Hart during one of their phone calls. "I don't have the resources, the space, the knowledge." "Then we build the resources," Dr. Hart interrupted. "Caleb, you've proven the concept. Now we need to scale it. That means funding, facilities, and training others to do what you do." Scaling meant money, and money meant Renee Vale. She'd been quietly working on something in the background, and 2 weeks after the hearing, she invited Caleb to lunch at a restaurant so expensive he felt underdressed in his cleanest shirt and newest jeans. "I want to fund a lab," Renee said without preamble, once they'd ordered. "A proper facility where you can work on mobility devices under Dr. Hart's supervision. Equipment, materials, staff, whatever you need." Caleb stared at her. "That would cost millions, I'm aware." Renee's expression was calm, businesslike. "I've spent the last 11 years throwing money at the medical establishment, trying to buy a solution for Harper's pain. You gave me that solution for the price of some modified parts and your time. This is me investing in the right approach." "I don't know how to run a lab. I barely know how to run my garage." "You won't be running it alone. Dr. Hart has agreed to come on as Chief Scientific Officer. I'll handle the business side. You'll do what you do best, fix things that everyone else has given up on." Renee leaned forward. "Caleb, there are thousands of people like Harper out there. Maybe tens of thousands. People suffering because the equipment that's supposed to help them was designed by engineers who never asked what the patients actually needed. You can't help all of them personally, but you can build something that will." The enormity of it was terrifying. Caleb had never wanted to be more than a mechanic with a garage and enough work to pay his bills. Now Renee was offering him a chance to build something that could change lives on a scale he couldn't quite comprehend. I need to think about it, he said. Of course, but don't think too long. Every day we wait is another day someone's in pain that could be prevented. Caleb drove home in a daze, Renee's offer running circles in his head. He found Emma doing homework at the kitchen table, her headphones on, completely absorbed in whatever she was studying. She looked up when he dropped his keys on the counter. How was lunch with the billionaire? She asked, pulling off her headphones. Complicated. Caleb grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat across from her. She wants to fund a whole lab, hire staff, turn this into a real operation. Emma's eyes widened. That's amazing. Why do you look like someone died? Because I don't know if I can do this. Running a lab, managing people, being responsible for patients, that's not me, Em. I fix cars. I work alone. I like my quiet life. Did you like it? Emma asked softly. Before Harper? Before all this? Because from where I was sitting, you looked like you were just going through the motions. Working, coming home, existing. Uncle David's death kind of broke something in you, and I don't think you've been really alive since then. Her words hit harder than Caleb expected. Had he just been existing, going through the routine of life without really living it? Helping Harper brought you back, Emma continued. I saw it. You had purpose again. You cared about something beyond just getting through the day. And yeah, this is scary and complicated and way bigger than anything you've done before. But Dad, you're good at this. You're really, really good at seeing what other people miss and fixing what everyone else says is unfixable. Don't waste that because you're scared. Caleb looked at his daughter, this 14-year-old kid who somehow had the wisdom of someone twice her age, and felt pride and gratitude wash over him. When did you get so smart? I keep telling you, I've always been smart. You just forget sometimes. She grinned. So are you going to do it? I think I have to. Uncle David would never forgive me if I didn't. The next morning, Caleb called Renee and accepted her offer. Within a week, she'd purchased a building in a light industrial area of San Diego. Nothing fancy, but spacious and well lit, with room for equipment and workstations. Dr. Hart flew down to help with setup, bringing an enthusiasm that made Caleb feel slightly less terrified about the whole thing. We'll start small, Dr. Hart said, walking through the empty space with a measuring tape and a notebook. Basic tools, a few workstations, materials storage. As we prove the concept and get more funding, we expand. But the core principle stays the same. Listen to patients, understand their actual needs, design solutions that work with their bodies instead of against them. They named it Mercer Mobility Lab, though Caleb argued unsuccessfully for something that didn't have his name in it. Renee insisted that his name carried weight after the hearing, that people would trust a place named after the mechanic who'd helped her daughter when no one else could. The build-out took 6 weeks. During that time, Caleb started his certification courses in biomedical engineering, studying at night after working at the garage during the day. The material was dense and technical, full of concepts he had to wrestle with, but Dr. Hart was patient in explaining things, and Caleb discovered he had a talent for the practical applications, even if the theory sometimes escaped him. Emma helped where she could, quizzing him on terminology and biomechanics, turning his study sessions into competitions to see who could remember more details. It was good, having her involved, watching her take pride in what her father was building. Harper became a fixture at the lab during setup, offering input on design from a patient's perspective. She tested every piece of equipment, every workstation height, every element of the space to make sure it would be accessible and welcoming to people with mobility challenges. Most medical facilities are designed for able-bodied people, she explained to Caleb one afternoon. Tall counters, narrow doorways, furniture that's hard to get in and out of. If we're going to help people, we need to make sure they feel comfortable here. Her insights were invaluable, catching things Caleb and Dr. Hart would never have considered. The result was a space that felt less like a medical facility and more like a workshop, functional and welcoming, with natural light and comfortable seating and an overall atmosphere that said, "You're safe here." The first official patient arrived 3 days after the lab opened. Marcus Chen was a 12-year-old boy with cerebral palsy, his leg braces causing pain similar to what Harper had experienced. His mother had driven 6 hours from Los Angeles after seeing Harper's story on the news. The doctors say the pain is normal, Mrs. Chen explained, her hand on her son's shoulder. They say he needs to strengthen his muscles. that he's not trying hard enough. But I watch him struggle every day, and I know something's wrong. Caleb examined Marcus's braces using the same methodical approach he'd used with Harper. The problems were different. Marcus's braces were too rigid, not allowing for the natural variation in his movements, forcing his body into positions it couldn't comfortably maintain. But the underlying issue was the same: equipment designed for a theoretical patient rather than the actual human wearing it. "I think we can help," Caleb said, "but it's going to take some time. I'll need to take detailed measurements, understand how Marcus moves, figure out what adjustments will work best for him specifically." The relief on Mrs. Chen's face was almost painful to witness. "How much will it cost? We don't have a lot of money." "Nothing," Renee said, appearing from the office area. She'd been working there most mornings, handling the administrative side of the operation. "The lab is funded. We're not here to make money off people's pain." Mrs. Chen started crying, and Marcus hugged his mother while Caleb and Renee gave them privacy. Once they'd composed themselves, Caleb got to work, spending 3 hours documenting everything about Marcus's braces and his body's relationship to them. The modifications took a week. Caleb worked under Dr. Hart's supervision, documenting every step, every decision, every test. When Marcus returned to try the adjusted braces, his first steps were tentative but increasingly confident. "It doesn't hurt," he said, wonder in his voice. "Mom, it doesn't hurt." He walked around the lab, then broke into an awkward run, laughing with pure joy. His mother cried again, but these were tears of relief and gratitude. Watching them, Caleb felt that same sense of purpose Emma had talked about, the feeling that what he was doing mattered in a way that transcended just earning a living. Word spread quickly after that. More families came, each with their own stories of pain and frustration and equipment that didn't work right. Caleb worked on each case methodically, learning from every patient, refining his approach. Dr. Hart provided scientific oversight and helped him understand the underlying principles behind what his intuition was telling him. Harper became an unofficial patient advocate, talking to families, sharing her own story, helping people understand what to expect from the process. She had a gift for it, a way of connecting with people who were dealing with challenges she understood intimately. "You should make this official," Renee told her daughter one evening. "Not just volunteering here, but actually working. You're good with people, good at explaining complex medical stuff in ways they can understand." Harper considered it. She'd been taking online classes, working toward a degree in something she hadn't quite figured out yet. "You think I could do it? Actually work here?" "I think you're doing it already," Caleb said. "We just need to make it official and pay you for it." So Harper joined the team as patient coordinator, a role that quickly expanded to include advocacy, education, and outreach. She started a blog documenting her journey and the lab's work, attracting attention from media outlets and disability rights organizations. Her voice, authentic, vulnerable, and unafraid to challenge the medical establishment, resonated with people who'd felt unheard for years. 6 months after the lab opened, they'd helped 47 patients. Not a huge number in the grand scheme of things, but 47 people who were in less pain, who could move more freely, who had a little more dignity and independence in their lives. Each one felt like keeping the promise Caleb had made to David. Then came the call that changed everything again. A representative from the National Institutes of Health wanted to visit the lab, to see what they were doing and discuss potential funding for a larger study. Apparently Harper's blog and the media coverage had caught the attention of people who controlled serious research money. "This could be massive," Dr. Hart said, pacing excitedly in her small office. "Federal funding means legitimacy. It means we could expand, hire more people, help more patients. It means we could actually change how the industry approaches mobility devices. But it also meant scrutiny. The NIH didn't hand out grants to operations that couldn't prove rigorous methodology and reproducible results. They'd need documentation, data, protocols, all the things Caleb had been learning but wasn't entirely comfortable with yet. The NIH representatives arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 people in business casual, carrying tablets and notebooks, looking around the lab with expressions Caleb couldn't quite read. They interviewed him, Dr. Hart, and Harper. They examined case files, reviewed modifications, asked pointed questions about safety protocols and outcome measurements. After 4 hours, the lead representative, Dr. Patricia Flores, sat down with the core team. I'll be honest, this is unusual. We don't typically fund operations run by someone without traditional credentials, but your outcomes are undeniable. The patient satisfaction data is extraordinary. And Doctor, Hart's involvement gives us confidence in the scientific rigor. But, Caleb prompted, hearing the hesitation in her voice, but we need more documentation. Formal studies comparing your modified devices to standard equipment, peer-reviewed publications, evidence that this approach works consistently across different patient populations. Dr. Flores paused. If you can provide that, we're prepared to fund a 5-year study that could transform how mobility devices are designed and prescribed. The amount she mentioned made Caleb's head spin. It was enough to expand the lab significantly, hire additional staff, help hundreds or even thousands of people, but it also meant committing to the academic side of things, the research, the publications, the bureaucracy that Caleb had spent his whole life avoiding. Can we have some time to discuss it? Dr. Hart asked. Of course, take a week, talk it over. But understand, this opportunity won't come around again. The NIH is interested now because you're novel and getting attention. That window will close eventually. After they left, Caleb sat in his office, a small room that still felt too official for someone who'd spent his career in a garage, and tried to process what had just happened. Emma stopped by after school, finding him staring at spreadsheets he didn't entirely understand. Heavy thoughts? She asked, dropping her backpack. Life-changing thoughts. The NIH wants to fund us, like serious money, enough to really build something significant. That's amazing. Why do you look so worried? Because it means going all in on this. No more garage work. No more just being a mechanic who helps people on the side. This would be my whole life. Caleb rubbed his face. What if I'm not smart enough? What if I can't handle the academic stuff, the research protocols, all the things that come with federal funding? Emma sat on the edge of his desk. Dad, you've been not smart enough your whole life according to the system. No college degree, no formal training, just a guy who fixes things. And somehow you figured out what teams of doctors and engineers couldn't. Maybe intelligence isn't about degrees and credentials. Maybe it's about actually paying attention to what matters. Her faith in him was humbling and terrifying in equal measure. Your mom would know what to do. She was always better at the big decisions. Mom would tell you to stop doubting yourself and do the thing that scares you, because that's usually the thing worth doing. Emma smiled. She'd also remind you that you don't have to do this alone. You've got Dr. Hart, Renee, Harper, and me. We're a team. Let us help carry the weight. The decision was made that evening. They would accept the NIH funding, commit to the formal studies, and build something that could actually change the industry. It was terrifying and exciting and felt like standing at the edge of something enormous. The next year was a blur of growth and challenge. The lab expanded into adjacent space, adding workstations and equipment. They hired 3 additional technicians, all of them trained by Dr. Hart and Caleb in the patient-centered approach that had become their signature. They brought on a full-time researcher to handle data collection and analysis for the NIH study. Harper's role grew too. She started speaking at conferences, sharing her story, and advocating for patient-centered design in medical devices. Her blog attracted tens of thousands of followers, people who found hope in her journey and the lab's mission. She became the face of the movement in a way that made Caleb deeply uncomfortable with his own growing public profile, but immensely proud of her courage. The research results started coming in after 6 months, and they were even better than Caleb had hoped. Patients using modified devices showed significant improvements in pain levels, mobility, and quality of life compared to those using standard equipment. The modifications were safe, effective, and reproducible when done following the protocols they'd developed. Dr. Hart published the preliminary findings in a major medical journal, with Caleb listed as co-author despite his protests that he hadn't really written anything. The paper sparked intense discussion in the medical device community, some celebrating the innovation, others criticizing the methodology, or questioning whether mechanics should be involved in medical care at all. But the patients kept coming. Word of mouth brought people from across the country, families who'd exhausted other options and were desperate for help. The lab couldn't accommodate everyone, but they documented their methods carefully, trained other facilities in their approach, and slowly built a network of providers who understood that listening to patients was just as important as engineering expertise. Emma graduated from middle school and started high school, already talking about studying biomedical engineering in college. She'd found her calling watching her father work, seeing the impact of combining technical skill with human empathy. Caleb couldn't have been more proud. On the one-year anniversary of the lab's opening, they held a small celebration. Current and former patients came, along with their families, creating a room full of people who represented lives changed by the simple act of listening and caring. Marcus was there, running around with other kids, his braces barely noticeable. A veteran named James who'd regained use of his prosthetic arm after years of it sitting unused in a closet. A young woman named Sophia, who'd gone back to college after modified braces, finally let her navigate campus without constant pain. And Harper, of course. She stood to speak, her mother beside her, both of them looking at Caleb with expressions of gratitude and affection that made him deeply uncomfortable and deeply grateful simultaneously. A year ago, I walked into a garage in pain, Harper began. I'd been in pain for so long I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to not hurt. Caleb looked at me, really looked at me, and saw something everyone else had missed. He saw that my pain wasn't inevitable. It was fixable. She paused, collecting herself. But what we've built here is about more than fixing braces or prosthetics. It's about fixing a system that forgot to put patients first. It's about proving that expertise isn't just about credentials. It's about caring enough to really understand someone's experience and brave enough to challenge conventional wisdom when it's causing harm. Harper looked directly at Caleb. You gave me my life back, but more than that, you gave me purpose. Working here, helping other people find the same relief and freedom I found, that's become my life's work. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. Thank you for not giving up when things got hard. Thank you for keeping your promise to your brother by helping me and everyone else who's walked through these doors. The room applauded, and Caleb had to blink hard against tears. He wasn't good at this. The emotion, the recognition, the feeling of being valued for something beyond just his technical skills. But standing there surrounded by people whose lives he'd touched, he let himself feel it fully. Dr. Hart spoke next, talking about the future, expanded research, new collaborations, the possibility of changing industry standards for medical device design. Renee announced additional funding to support pro bono work for families who couldn't afford modifications. Emma surprised everyone by presenting a scholarship fund she'd created in David's name to support students from non-traditional backgrounds pursuing careers in biomedical engineering. My uncle believed in second chances and questioning authority, Emma said. This scholarship is for kids like my dad, people who think differently, who see solutions others miss, who care more about results than rules, because those are the people who change the world. The celebration continued late into the evening, people sharing stories and laughter and hope. Caleb found himself standing outside as the sun set, watching the California sky turn orange and pink, feeling the weight of the past year and the promise of what was coming. Renee joined him, 2 cups of coffee in hand. She passed him one without speaking, and they stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Thank you, Caleb said finally, for believing in this, for making it possible. I should be thanking you. You gave me my daughter back. Renee's voice was thick with emotion. Before you, Harper was just surviving. Now she's thriving. She has purpose and passion and a future she's excited about. That's worth more than any amount of money I could spend. She's extraordinary. What she's built here with the patient advocacy, the blog, the speaking, that's all her. She learned from watching you, learned that one person who cares enough can make a difference. That expertise comes in many forms, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to accept that suffering is inevitable. Renee looked at him. You've changed a lot of lives, Caleb, not just Harper's, all of us who've been part of this. A few weeks later, Harper called Caleb with an unusual request. There's something I want to do and I need your help. What kind of something? I want to go back to the beach, the one where I drowned, where everything started. Her voice was steady but vulnerable. I haven't been back since the accident. I was too scared and then I couldn't walk well enough to actually get down to the water, but now, you want to face it, Caleb finished. I want to prove to myself that it doesn't own me anymore, that I'm not defined by what happened there, but I don't want to go alone. They planned it for a Saturday morning. Harper, Renee, Caleb, and Emma. The beach was the same as it had been 11 years ago. Golden sand and rolling waves, and the kind of California sunshine that made everything feel possible. Harper stood at the parking lot's edge, looking down at the water, and Caleb could see her gathering courage. "You don't have to do this," Renee said softly. "Yes, I do." Harper took a breath, then started walking down the sandy path toward the beach. The sand was challenging, shifting under her feet in ways that pavement never did, but Harper navigated it with growing confidence. The modified braces adapted to the terrain, adjusting their support as needed. When she reached the hard-packed sand near the water, she stopped, staring at the waves. "This is where it happened," she said quietly, "where I went under and everything changed." Caleb stood beside her, not speaking, just being present. Emma and Renee held back, giving Harper space. "For years I was so angry at this place," Harper continued. "Angry at the ocean, at my 8-year-old self for swimming out too far, at my body for breaking. I felt like the girl I was supposed to be drowned that day. And all that was left was this broken version who could never be whole again." She walked closer to the water, her feet at the edge where waves washed up and retreated. "But that girl didn't drown. She survived. She fought through years of pain and limitation and people telling her to accept less than she deserved. She grew up into someone who refuses to let trauma define her future." Harper turned to look at Caleb. "You helped me remember that I'm not just my injury or my limitations. I'm a person with dreams and capabilities and the right to move through the world without constant pain. You helped me reclaim my life." Then, before anyone could react, Harper kicked off her shoes, unstrapped her braces with practiced efficiency, and walked into the water. Just her feet at first, then her ankles, then deeper until small waves lapped at her calves. She stood there, arms spread, face turned toward the sun, laughing with pure joy. Renee gasped, moving forward instinctively, but Caleb caught her arm. "Let her have this moment. She's okay." And Harper was okay. More than okay. She was free, standing in the water that had nearly killed her, proving that trauma didn't have to be destiny, that the past could be faced and overcome, that broken things could heal stronger than they'd been before. When Harper finally came back to shore, everyone was crying. She hugged her mother first, both of them laughing through tears, years of fear and grief and hope tangling together. Then she hugged Caleb, holding tight. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for seeing me, for not giving up, for helping me find my way back to myself." "You did the hard part," Caleb said. "I just adjusted some angles and replaced some parts. You're the one who had the courage to keep fighting." They spent the rest of the morning at the beach, talking and walking and watching Emma build elaborate sandcastles with engineering precision. It was peaceful, healing, a moment of quiet triumph after a year of intense work and change. On the drive home, Emma fell asleep in the passenger seat, exhausted from sun and emotion. Caleb drove in silence, thinking about how far they'd all come. A year ago, he'd been a mechanic in a struggling garage, going through the motions of life without really living. Now he was running a lab, helping people across the country, building something that might actually change an entire industry. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Hart. "Dr. Hart, NIH just approved the full 5-year funding. We're official. Time to change the world." Caleb smiled, glancing at Emma's sleeping face, thinking about Harper standing in the waves, remembering David and the promise made in a hospital room 5 years ago. He'd thought that promise was just about helping one person if he ever got the chance, but it had become so much more. A mission, a calling, a way to honor his brother's memory by making sure other people didn't have to suffer the way David had suffered. They pulled into the driveway as the sun was setting. Emma woke up, groggy and smiling. "We home?" "We're home," Caleb confirmed. Inside, the house was quiet and familiar, filled with memories of the life he'd built and the family he'd raised. But it felt different now too, fuller somehow, expanded by the new purpose he'd found and the people who'd become part of his extended family through the lab. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Harper. "Thank you for today, for everything. You didn't just fix my braces, you helped me fix my life. That beach used to represent the worst day of my existence. Now, it represents freedom. That's the gift you gave me." Caleb read the message twice, feeling the weight of gratitude and responsibility and hope. He'd set out to keep a promise to a dead brother. Along the way, he'd discovered that fixing things, whether cars or braces or broken spirits, was more than just a job. It was a way to make meaning from loss, to transform pain into purpose, to prove that one person who cares enough really can change lives. Emma appeared in the doorway, already in pajamas. "What are you smiling about?" "Just thinking about how weird life is. A year ago, I was fixing cars and trying not to think too hard about anything. Now I'm running a research lab and changing the medical device industry." "You're still fixing things," Emma pointed out. "Just different things. Important things." "Yeah," Caleb agreed. "I guess I am." That night, he dreamed of David. Not the sick, suffering David from the end, but his brother, as he'd been before the accident, full of life and laughter and plans for the future. In the dream, David smiled at him and said, "You did good, little brother. You kept your promise." Caleb woke up with tears on his face and peace in his heart. The journey from a mechanic's garage to a federally funded research lab had been unexpected and often terrifying. But it had also been necessary, meaningful, and exactly where he was supposed to be. Mercer Mobility Lab continued to grow over the following years. They helped thousands of patients, published groundbreaking research, and slowly but surely changed how the medical device industry thought about patient-centered design. Harper became a nationally recognized advocate for disability rights, speaking at conferences and advising companies on how to actually listen to the people using their products. Emma went to college for biomedical engineering, already planning to come back and work at the lab after graduation, carrying forward the mission her father had started and her uncle had inspired. Renee split her time between her biotech company and the lab, using her business expertise to scale their impact while never forgetting that it had all started with a broken-down Rolls-Royce and a mother's desperate hope. And Caleb kept doing what he'd always done, listening to people who were suffering, seeing problems everyone else had missed, and fixing things one careful adjustment at a time. He never got entirely comfortable with the recognition or the accolades. He was still, at heart, just a mechanic who'd made a promise and refused to break it. But he'd learned that sometimes being just something was enough. That expertise came in many forms. That caring deeply and paying attention closely could be just as valuable as any credential or degree. That one person, working with stubborn love and careful hands, really could build miracles. Not by magic or genius, but by the simple revolutionary act of listening to what people needed and refusing to accept that their suffering was inevitable. One stubborn, loving step at a time.